The history of Central Asia has been determined primarily by the area's climate and geography. The aridity of the region makes agriculture difficult, and distance from the sea cut it off from much trade. Thus, few major cities developed in the region. Nomadic horse peoples of the steppe dominated the area for millennia. Relations between the steppe nomads and the settled people in and around Central Asia were marked by conflict. The nomadic lifestyle was well suited to warfare, and the steppe horse riders became some of the most militarily potent people in the world, due to the devastating techniques and ability of their horse archers. Periodically, tribal leaders or changing conditions would organize several tribes into a single military force, which would then often launch campaigns of conquest, especially into more civilized areas. A few of these types of tribal coalitions included the Huns' invasion of Europe, various Turkic migrations into Transoxian, the Wuhu attacks on China, and most notably the Mongol conquest of much of Eurasia. The dominance of the nomads ended in the 16th century, as firearms allowed settled people to gain control of the region. The Russian Empire, the Tang Dynasty of China, and other powers expanded into the area and seized the bulk of Central Asia by the end of the 19th century. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Soviet Union incorporated most of Central Asia. Only Mongolia and Afghanistan remained nominally independent. Although Mongolia existed as a Soviet satellite state and Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan in the late 20th century, the Soviet areas of Central Asia saw much industrialization and construction of infrastructure, but also the suppression of local cultures and a lasting legacy of ethnic tensions and environmental problems. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, 5 Central Asian countries gained independence: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. In all of the new states, former Communist Party officials retained power as local strongmen. Prehistory. Recent genetic studies have concluded that modern humans arrived in the region 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. The archaeological evidence of population in this region is sparse, whereas evidence of human habitation in Africa and Australia prior to that of Central Asia is well known. Some studies have also identified this region as the likeliest source of the populations who later inhabited Europe, Siberia, and North America. According to the Kurgan hypothesis, the northwest of the region is also considered to be the source of the root of the Indo-European languages. As early as 4500 BC, small communities had developed permanent settlements and began to engage in agricultural practices as well as herding. Around this time, some of these communities began the domestication of the horse. Initially, the horses were bred solely for their meat, as a source of food. By 4000 BCE it is believed that they were used for transportation purposes. Wheeled wagons began making an appearance during this time. Once the utility of the horse as a means of transportation became clear, the horses began being bred for strength, and by the 3rd millennium BC they were strong enough to pull chariots. By 2000 BC, war chariots had spoked wheels, thus being made more maneuverable, and dominated the battlefields. The growing use of the horse combined with the failure, roughly around 2000 BC, of the always precarious irrigation systems that had allowed for extensive agriculture in the region, gave rise and dominance of pastoral nomadism by 1000 BC, a way of life that would dominate the region for the next several millennia. Scattered nomadic groups maintained herds of sheep, goats, horses, and camels, and conducted annual migrations to find new pastures. The people lived in yurts, tents made of hides and wood that could be disassembled and transported. Each group had several yurts, each accommodating about 5 people. While the semi-arid plains were dominated by the nomads, Small city-states and sedentary agrarian societies arose in the more humid areas of Central Asia. The Bactria-Marjana archaeological complex of the early 2nd millennium BCE was the first sedentary civilization of the region, practicing irrigation, farming of wheat and barley, and possibly a form of writing. Bactria-Marjana probably interacted with the contemporary Bronze Age nomads of the Andronovo culture, the originators of the spoke-wheeled chariot, who lived to their north in western Siberia, Russia, and parts of Kazakhstan, and survived as a culture until the 1st millennium BC. These cultures, particularly Bactria-Marjana, have been posited as possible representatives of the hypothetical Aryan culture ancestral to the speakers of the Indo-Iranian languages. Later, the strongest of Sogdian city-states of the Fergana Valley rose to prominence. After the 1st century BC, these cities became home to the traders of the Silk Road and grew wealthy from this trade. The steppe nomads were dependent on these settled people for a wide array of goods that were impossible for transient populations to produce. The nomads traded for these when they could, but because they generally did not produce goods of interest to sedentary people, the popular alternative was to carry out raids. A wide variety of people came to populate the steppes. Nomadic groups in Central Asia included the Huns and other Turks, the Tocharians, Persians, Scythians and other Indo-Europeans, and a number of Mongol groups. Despite these ethnic and linguistic differences, the steppe lifestyle led to the adoption of very similar culture across the region. Ancient era. In the 2nd and 1st millennia BC, a series of large and powerful states developed on the southern periphery of Central Asia. These empires launched several attempts to conquer the steppe people, but met with only mixed success. The Median Empire and Achaemenid Empire both ruled parts of Central Asia. The Xiongnu Empire AD may be seen as the first Central Asian empire which set an example for later Gokturk and Mongol empires. Xiongnu's ancestor Zhani tribe founded Zhongshan State in Hebei Province, China. The title Chani was used by the Xiongnu rulers before Mojin Chani, so it is possible that statehood history of the Xiongnu began long before Modern's rule. Following the success of the Han-Xiongnu War, Chinese states would also regularly strive to extend their power westwards. Despite their military might, these states found it difficult to conquer the whole region. When faced by a stronger force, the nomads could simply retreat deep into the steppe and wait for the invaders to leave. With no cities and little wealth other than the herds they took with them, the nomads had nothing they could be forced to defend. An example of this is given by Herodotus's detailed account of the futile Persian campaigns against the Scythians. The Scythians, like most nomad empires, had permanent settlements of various sizes, representing various degrees of civilization. The vast fortified settlement of Kamenka on the Dnieper River, settled since the end of the 5th century BC, became the center of the Scythian kingdom ruled by Attis, who lost his life in a battle against Philip II of Macedon in 339 BC. Some empires, such as the Persian and Macedonian empires, did make deep inroads into Central Asia by founding cities and gaining control of the trading centers. Alexander the Great's conquest spread Hellenistic civilization all the way to Alexandria Escut, established in 329 BC in modern Tajikistan. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his Central Asian territory fell to the Seleucid Empire during the Wars of the Diadochi. In 250 BC, the Central Asian portion of the empire seceded as the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, which had extensive contacts with India and China until its end in 125 BC. The Indo-Greek Kingdom, mostly based in the Punjab region but controlling a fair part of Afghanistan, pioneered the development of Greco-Buddhism. The Kushan kingdom thrived across a wide swath of the region from the 2nd century BC to the 4th century AD, and continued Hellenistic and Buddhist traditions. These states prospered from their position on the Silk Road linking China and Europe. Likewise, in East and Central Asia, the Chinese Han Dynasty expanded into the region at the height of its imperial power. From roughly 115 to 60 BC, Han forces fought the Xiongnu over control of the oasis city-states in the Tarim Basin. The Han was eventually victorious and established the Protectorate of the Western regions in 60 BC, which dealt with the region's defense and foreign affairs. Chinese rule in Tarim Basin was replaced successively with Kushans and Hephthalites. Later, external powers such as the Sassanid Empire would come to dominate this trade. One of those powers, the Parthian Empire, was of Central Asian origin, but adopted Persian-Greek cultural traditions. This is an early example of a recurring theme of Central Asian history. Occasionally nomads of Central Asian origin would conquer the kingdoms and empires surrounding the region, but quickly merge into the culture of the conquered peoples. At this time Central Asia was a heterogeneous region with a mixture of cultures and religions. Buddhism remained the largest religion, but was concentrated in the east. Around Persia, Zoroastrianism became important. Nestorian Christianity entered the area, but was never more than a minority faith. More successful was Manichaeism, which became the third largest faith. Many Central Asians practiced more than one faith, and almost all of the local religions were infused with local shamanistic traditions. Turkic expansion began in the 6th century, and following the Göktürk Emperor, Turkic tribes quickly spread westward across all of Central Asia. The Turkic-speaking Uyghurs were one of many distinct cultural groups brought together by the trade of the Silk Route at Turfan, which was then ruled by China's Tang Dynasty. The Uyghurs, primarily pastoral nomads, observed a number of religions including Manichaeism, Buddhism, and Nestorian Christianity. Many of the artifacts from this period were found in the 19th century in this remote desert region. Medieval Sui and early Tang dynasty. It was during the Sui and Tang dynasties that China expanded into East and Central Asia. Chinese foreign policy to the north and west now had to deal with Turkic nomads, who were becoming the most dominant ethnic group in Central Asia. To handle and avoid any threats posed by the Turks, the Sui government repaired fortifications and received their trade and tribute missions. They sent royal princesses off to marry Turkic clan leaders, a total of 4 of them in 597, 599, 614, and 617. The Sui stirred trouble and conflict amongst ethnic groups against the Turks. As early as the Sui dynasty, the Turks had become a major militarized force employed by the Chinese. When the Khitans began raiding northeast China in 605, a Chinese general led 20,000 Turks against them. Distributing Khitan livestock and women to the Turks is a reward. On 2 occasions between 635 to 636, Tang royal princesses were married to Turk mercenaries or generals in Chinese service. Throughout the Tang dynasty until the end of 755, there were approximately 10 Turkic generals serving under the Tang. While most of the Tang army was made of Fubing Chinese conscripts, the majority of the troops led by Turkic generals were of non-Chinese origin, campaigning largely in the western frontier where the presence of Fubing troops was low. Some Turkic troops were nomadicized Han Chinese, a Decena-sized people. Civil war in China was almost totally diminished by 626. Along with the defeat in 628 of the Ordos Chinese warlord Liang Shiju. After these internal conflicts, the Tang began an offensive against the Turks. In the year 630, Tang armies captured areas of the Ordos Desert, modern-day Inner Mongolia province, and southern Mongolia from the Turks. After this military victory, Emperor Taizong won the title of Great Khan amongst the various Turks in the region who pledged their allegiance to him and the Chinese Empire. On June 11, 631, Emperor Taizong also sent envoys to the Zhuangzi bearing gold and silk in order to persuade the release of enslaved Chinese prisoners who were captured during the transition from Sui to Tang from the northern frontier. This embassy succeeded in freeing 80,000 Chinese men and women who were then returned to China. While the Turks were settled in the Ordos region, the Tang government took on the military policy of dominating the central steppe. Like the earlier Han dynasty, the Tang dynasty, along with Turkic allies like the Uyghurs, conquered and subdued Central Asia during the 640s and 650s. During Emperor Taizong's reign alone, large campaigns were launched against not only the Gok Turks but also separate campaigns against the Tuyu Hun and the Zhuangzi. Taizong also launched campaigns against the oasis states of the Tarim Basin, beginning with the annexation of Gaochang in 640. The nearby kingdom of Kharosa was captured by the Tang in 644 and the kingdom of Kucha was conquered in 649. The expansion into Central Asia continued under Taizong's successor, Emperor Gaozong, who invaded the Western Turks ruled by the Khan Ashina-Helu in 657 with an army led by Su Dingfang. Ashina was defeated and the Khaganate was absorbed into the Tang Empire. The territory was administered through the Yangtze Protectorate and the 4 garrisons of Yangtze. Tang hegemony beyond the Pamir Mountains in modern Tajikistan and Afghanistan ended with revolts by the Turks, but the Tang retained a military presence in Xinjiang. These holdings were later invaded by the Tibetan Empire to the south in 670. For the remainder of the Tang dynasty, the Tarim Basin alternated between Tang and Tibetan rule as they competed for control of Central Asia. Tang rivalry with the Tibetan Empire. The Tang Empire competed with the Tibetan Empire for control of areas in Inner and Central Asia, which was at times settled with marriage alliances such as the marrying of Princess Wencheng to Songtsan Gampo. A Tibetan tradition mentions that after Songtsan Gampo's death in 649 AD, Chinese troops captured Lhasa. The Tibetan scholar Sepon W. D. Shakab believes that the tradition is in error and that those histories reporting the arrival of Chinese troops are not correct, and claims that the event is mentioned neither in the Chinese annals nor in the manuscripts of Dunhuang. There was a long string of conflicts with Tibet over territories in the Tarim Basin between 670 to 692 and in 763 the Tibetans even captured the capital of China, Shanghai, for 15 days during the Anshi Rebellion. In fact, it was during this rebellion that the Tang withdrew its western garrisons stationed in what is now Gansu and Qinghai, which the Tibetans then occupied along with the territory of what is now Xinjiang. Hostilities between the Tang and Tibet continued until they signed a formal peace treaty in 821. The terms of this treaty, including the fixed borders between the two countries, are recorded in a bilingual inscription on a stone pillar outside the Jokang Temple in Lhasa. Islamic empires. In the 8th century, Islam began to penetrate the region. The desert nomads of Arabia could militarily match the nomads of the steppe, and the early Arab Empire gained control over parts of Central Asia. The early conquests under Qutayb ibn Muslim were soon reversed by a combination of native uprisings and invasion by the Turkish. But the collapse of the Turkish Khaganate after 738 opened the way for the reimposition of Muslim authority under Nasir ibn Sayyid. The Arab invasion also saw Chinese influence expelled from Western Central Asia. At the Battle of Talis in 751, an Arab army decisively defeated a Tang dynasty force, and for the next several centuries Middle Eastern influences would dominate the region. Large-scale Islamization, however, did not begin until the 9th century, running parallel with the fragmentation of Abbasid political authority and the emergence of local Iranian and Turkic dynasties like the Samanids.